Hello, listeners. This is the Risky Planner Podcast. Thanks for tuning in. Otto, is it too late to say Happy New Year, Albert?
It's never too late to say Happy New Year. Happy New Year, mate.
No, it's got to be within 2 weeks. Isn't that a Seinfeld episode? Well, anyways, Happy New Year.
I don't know. Happy
Albert.
New Year to you. I mean, we've been talking, of course. Like this is not the first time we've said Happy New Year to each other, but it
only
is our
once.
first opportunity.
We've only talked once.
That's true. We haven't mostly just
only
text.
once.
But
well, I think we got to really. This is going to be an interesting season. Let me just say, because we've got some really exciting episodes planned. But before we talk about that, this episode is pretty fun. It's going to be pretty
this is a fun one. We were kind of dreamboarding this one from last year, and I think we've got some good stuff to talk about. But before we get into that, how was your break?
Yeah, my break was restful because I didn't do too much.
Yeah, man.
We went up to my in-laws, my father-in-law's house, and other than that, no, didn't do too much. It was great. A lot of just lying low. You?
I developed some extremely damaging habits, W/R/T, sleeping too long and eating too much.
Yeah.
So, it's been really hard to break those since I got back into adulting in the new year.
Adulting. Yeah, it's true. I said it last year and I'll say it again, but the break kind of makes me nervous because then the first week you get back, it's just a constant oh my God, what's going on? You got to follow up with people. You got to where did this thing go? It's a lot of scrambling.
Yeah, it is.
But I think we're in a good place. We announced some news this week. Man, it was a major week for us.
Major week, huge week for us.
Major week.
We are recording this on January the 22nd, just to be clear. And earlier this week, we announced a partnership with Sound Consult.
That's right.
Which is a huge deal for us and also, frankly, maybe getting a little too big for our britches here, but for Canada.
No, it's huge. So Sound Consult is the oldest and largest engineering firm in Saudi Arabia. They've got 2,800 engineers, team employees, staff across the kingdom, and we are teaming up with them to bring our brand of project controls and system implementation in an EPCM model to the kingdom. So it's really exciting.
It's really cool.
So that's cool, but even cooler was the Minister of International Trade from Canada. He gave us a quote for our news release, an endorsement. And then after the fact, and that announcement came on the 20th, so that's just 2 days ago. And then after the fact, just yesterday, the Canadian ambassador to Saudi Arabia tagged us
really cool
on LinkedIn. So it's been a huge week for us.
This all makes more sense in context when you understand that our CEO, Tarek Dokanish, was part of the trade delegation to Saudi that just came back. They just came home. So, we had a couple of folks there to represent Canada's competitive advantages and interests in collaboration with the kingdom. And it went really well. Obviously there was that one deal, but that wasn't the only one. You can go check on LinkedIn and see all kinds of other interesting stuff that came out of that delegation. But, this is all part of that whole geopolitical reorganization that happens for reasons we won't get into. But
well, I'm saying it's a huge week, and let's be clear. We have a solution and services that are peerless in the market, so to speak, and there is so much work that's happening in Saudi Arabia and UAE and GCC nations that it's the place we should be there because we're going to have an impact. So
especially since a lot of the projects that are happening there are suffering from some pretty typical mega project woes.
Yep.
Which happened to be the topic of today's episode.
It's a good segue.
Thank you.
Right. Yeah.
Now, unfortunately, it was an excellent segue that I'm going to have to segue directly out of. But because before we get to that, let's talk about our survey.
Yeah. So we're a year in. We'd love to get to know you better. our listeners this year. And so starting with this episode, we're going to be running a survey to get to know you better. And we're going to be asking you several questions. We'll make sure that it doesn't take a lot of your time, but we'd really appreciate it if you engage with us and let us know who you are and sort of what you would be interested in hearing more of. Feedback is always welcomed. So stay tuned. We'll have more information at the end of the show.
For sure. So we won't belabor it any further, but look for a link to that in the show notes. We'll also get it out on LinkedIn. So if you're the kind of person that only listens to the first 10 minutes of a podcast, this is for you. Go check us out on LinkedIn, follow that link, complete our survey, help us out.
Yeah, we're under that 10 minutes mark, so hopefully people are still with me.
Just under.
Okay, Albert, let me segue back to the episode and our topic at hand.
Yep.
Yeah, and so last month we were talking about like a concept of a capital project time machine where we spend a bit of time going back and dissecting the mistakes or decision making, the risks, the delays on projects that turned into disasters, and just spending some time dissecting them, ones that you will know very well, and bringing our own brand of expertise to them.
Yeah, like you kind of think of it as like, what if we were time traveling project managers from the year 2026, going back in time to run these projects again, right? What would we do differently? What would we know that could maybe change the outcome a little bit? And I think it's worth mentioning that these projects are all failures from the perspective of their cost and schedule performance, but not all of them are, failures from the perspective of did they achieve their objectives, right?
Right.
Some of the things we're going to talk about are absolutely iconic. And in fact, let's start with arguably the most iconic, the Sydney Opera House.
Yeah, the Sydney Opera House is beautiful. It's like really it's emblematic of Sydney as a city, even like Australia as a country.
Yes.
It has incredible significance. It's beautiful. By all measures, it's a success, right? Like after the fact.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know how good it is as an opera house, but it sure looks great on a postcard, right? And it's in the background of like every movie that films in Australia. I mean, it is undeniably one of the architectural marvels of the world.
That's right.
And all that cost just over 1,300% of what they thought it was going to cost.
1,300. Yeah. Okay. Let's jump into it, Albert. What are your thoughts like right away?
Well, I think it's worth mentioning this and the next one we're going to talk about, which, spoiler alert, it's the Big Dig. We can't shut up about the Big Dig, so we're not going to. But in both of these cases, you're talking about projects that, like we said, unmitigated successes from the perspective of did they get the thing done, right? Yeah. I mean, in fact, the city of Sydney considers the project to be a pretty massive success. Now, this is, 60 years on from when the thing was actually finished. But it generates a ton of revenue. It's a massive tourist draw. Like it is a success, but that doesn't mean that it couldn't have been done for a smaller price tag and in less time.
Yeah.
The thing was delivered 10 years late. 10 years.
Yeah.
So
people don't remember, right? The pain or the frustration of some of these projects, the Big Dig in particular in Boston. That was like, by all measures, that's a success, right? They're talking about doing another one. And that after the fact is, let's, all is forgiven. Let's go. Maybe people get voted out of office and whatnot, but
well, that's something that we're definitely going to talk
positive.
about, because when schedules go long, like they did on Sydney, right? There are political changes that happen. People start to want to throw rocks.
Yeah.
So when new politicians, new administrations come in, they want to throw rocks at the old team and start making changes and stuff. And making changes to by the way, this is going to be point one that we're talking about. Like the longer, by the way, it's not my point. It's something I'm lifting, as I often do, from Ben Flyvberg. He put this pretty. Nate's laughing at me.
Holler, Ben.
Yeah,
holler back.
Shout out to Professor Flyvberg. There's a lot of Ben Flyvberg in this episode. Just brace yourself for that.
That's where the research is, right? So
that's where it comes from. A lot of it. But in this particular case, it's about that window of risk, right? The longer you spend in execution, the more stuff can go wrong. So the old truism that a dollar spent in planning is worth $1.50 in execution is even truer on mega projects and iconic projects and unique or first of a kind projects than it is on your average everyday project, and it's pretty true on your average everyday project.
Yeah, that's right. So Albert, can you just kind of level set on the Sydney Opera House? Like, we're going to go back in time. Let's start at that moment. What are we looking at, and as an executive sort of overseeing that project, and sort of what are you prioritizing?
Sure. So first off, I want to say that if the Sydney Opera House is like emblematic of any one kind of project failure, it's a failure of scoping, right? Of like having your arms around your scope. So my favorite factoid about this is that, in the mid 50s, there was an architectural contest for the new Opera House in Sydney. And the winning sketch was so beautiful and so iconic and so revolutionary that the committee awarding the prize to the architects ignored the fact that it did not meet almost any of the requirements for a valid submittal to the architectural contest. Right? It didn't include structural calculations. It didn't include like a constructability plan. It was literally just a sketch. Right. So when we talk about building something from the back of a napkin, that's the Sydney Opera House.
That's literally where it is.
So, flash forward to 1,400% of cost overruns. Now you know why, right? They had absolutely no idea how to build the roof shells. Construction began in 1959. They didn't know how they were going to build the roof geometry until 3 years later. So anybody who's ever built anything before might be thinking, but hang on. They were 3 years into construction and they didn't know how the roof was going to be. So how did they build the foundations?
So when you go back in time, you're going all the way back to the contest to begin with, right?
Well, because that's when the planning starts.
Yep.
Right?
Yep.
So,
and what's the conversation you'd have with that panel?
Well, first off, I would tell them, and then again, like everybody listening to this is going to immediately key into like, oh, hindsight's 2020. Of course, yeah, time traveling project.
That's the point.
That's the point. Okay.
Yeah.
So, what we know now is that projects like this one have a tendency to run massively over on schedule, and then those schedule issues tend to translate into cost issues, right? So, back to that, dollar in planning, $1.50 in execution thing. You spend as much time as you can in project planning. You spend as much time as you can getting your arms around the scope. That doesn't mean that owners have to develop their own scope or own their own scope. In fact, that's a really inefficient way of doing things usually. But at the very least, you and the people who are responsible for the design, you as an owner need to get your arms around what you're building before you break ground.
Right.
So I mentioned earlier, we don't have roof geometry solved until 3 years into construction. How did they build the foundation? Well, the answer is they built it wrong, right? They had to rip out the foundation and rebuild it 3 years into construction.
Right.
So how crazy is that?
Yeah, it's pretty wild. So walk me through it. Like, put yourself on that panel and you're looking at the napkin. Let's say you're looking at the sketch. What are the questions that you're asking your fellow panelists to consider?
Oh, well, in this case, I don't even have to be a time traveler to answer that question because I would be, but I wouldn't
because
have to be.
It's not real.
It's not even
time travel. Time traveling is not real.
Yeah. I don't have to be a real time traveler, obviously. But even somebody at the time, people did raise this concern at the time. It wasn't a compliant bid, right? So, it's really interesting. It's something that they probably should have considered, for another building someplace else or whatever. But there is an argument to be made that they should have binned that sketch, right? Or at the very least, if they were so married to the idea that sketch was the winner, then they should have given all of the proponents an extra 2 weeks or something to develop their designs further. And you can put a smoke screen up and saying like, hey, we got a lot of really great bids. We want to see them developed more. So we're adding 2 weeks of the contest to flesh out structural details and constructability and, do a little bit of early doors planning, which you can very much do in 2 weeks off a sketch, right? Because you don't need much, but you need something, right? They literally had no idea how they were going to build this thing when they said, yep, that's our winner, right? So, initially they were going to build the whole opera house. And granted, this was in the mid 50s for 7 million Australian dollars.
That's crazy.
And that 1,400% price increase takes us up over $100 million.
Yeah.
So, by the way, $100 million for that building is a steal in today's dollars.
Yeah, I was going to say in today's dollars. Wait a second. You have to like adjust.
Yeah.
So what were all the, like, what else did you discover about sort of Sydney's Opera House and the process by which they built it?
One thing that's really crazy about it is that it very nearly did not get fully funded, right? There were 496 special lotteries that raised the exact amount required to finish the building. Okay.
Wow.
So the taxpayers in Sydney were ready to tear the building down, with sticks and rocks, because it was taking so long and costing so much. Like, people were expecting to go see operas in there when the roof wasn't even on yet. Right.
Right.
So, it's delivering something 10 years late, is it's pretty bad. And like, we're going to have some others that are in that same time frame, but this one really stands out for being a massive overrun on both cost and schedule, and people noticed, right?
Right.
So, the architect resigned, and before the building was finished, like in 1966, he resigned, and he never came back to Australia, ever.
Wow. Yeah.
So, and by the way, what's really crazy, 1966, when we're talking about, in 2007, UNESCO, right? What does UNESCO stand for?
United Nations. Why am
UNESCO.
Yeah.
Yeah, we're blanking on this one.
Yeah. You're just supposed to say UNESCO.
Yeah,
That's
I know, I'm going to UNESCO, but it does stand for something. So Nate's going to rescue me from this with a little hot Googling while I explain that UNESCO named this a World Heritage Site in 2007 while the main architect, a guy called Utsan, was still alive. Okay. That is the only time that's ever happened, and this is the youngest building that has ever been listed as a World Heritage Site.
It's the United Nations Educational, Scientific, and Cultural Organization.
There you go.
But it's like this Sagrada Familia in
the Sagrada Familia, yeah.
Thank you. Was a UNESCO heritage site before it was finished, but everybody who planned that was long dead.
I mean, that was a whole separate thing. Yeah,
this is different.
That's a whole separate thing, because you can actually. I've been inside.
So have I.
Familia.
It's beautiful.
Man, it's crazy. Worth every dollar spent on this. But again, same thing for the Opera House, right? Like, massive failure, went way over on everything. But come on, man, it's the Sydney Opera House.
What's funny is we're going to talk about the Sydney Opera House, the Big Dig. We're going to talk about some other projects. All of these projects had capable people, right? Yeah. They had a PMO, right? These were smart people, but they or the group or the sponsor, they all made bad decisions at certain points with the data that they had.
Yep.
Right.
Yep. Well, for sure. And sometimes that's for very understandable reasons. Now, I don't think you could throw that particular rock at Sydney so much. I don't think there was any real strategic misrepresentation going on there. But strategic misrepresentation is definitely the theme of our next project that we're going to talk about, which is the Big Dig.
Yeah. Okay. And that was something, it's been well covered in the media. There's lots of research. So I think we can spend a little bit of time sort of, how would you have approached that? Even like some of the community engagement was pretty wild in terms of trying to get that through and finished. But was that a project where it's just kind of like, let's get it started and we'll sort of plan it as we go?
No, it wasn't. It wasn't intended to be that. It was actually subject to a great deal of planning, but the planning was wholly insufficient to the task of actually building it. And so this is like, unlike the Sydney Opera House, which basically got started with no plan, the Big Dig got started with what everybody thought was a pretty good plan. There, with the exception of people who were, what we would now call NIMBYs, right? Like folks who were just not interested in having a giant construction project in their backyard. Like those people didn't love the plan. There were always alternative solutions, right? Because the point of the Big Dig was to delete a large elevated highway structure that ran right through the middle of downtown Boston and reclaim all that space for like green space and housing and things like that. and improve air quality and improve noise levels and all that stuff. So like all of those objectives could have been met in a variety of ways, right?
Right.
So the big dig was just the one that won out, right? But there were always people who were against it, and that actually is one of the things that made it take so dang long. Because this one, the Sydney Opera House went over by 1,400%. The big dig went over by a lot more than that. Well, in real dollars, it was about 560%. But it was over budget by what was it, like $20 billion?
Something like that.
I mean, we're talking about a starting cost of $2.6 billion, a finished cost of $14.8 billion, but there were also $9 billion in interest and servicing on the actual funding. So there's a total cost of $24 billion on an initial $2.6 billion budget. So if you include all that stuff, it's almost 10x.
Yeah. And you know what is interesting? Like I said, there were seasoned planners, there were seasoned project controllers, smart executive sponsors. Do you think the data wasn't there that caused the overruns, or was it that, the executives or whomever didn't want to pay attention to what the data was saying?
Well, I mentioned that strategic misrepresentation was a big part of this. Trusting your contractors too much is another part. We'll get to that. But what is strategic misrepresentation? So on the subject of smart executives, you generally speaking, there are some exceptions, of course, but you don't get to be a project executive, overseeing a mega project if you're a dum-dum, okay? You're probably a pretty smart cookie.
That's
you
a
probably
technical
have
term.
Yeah, dum-dum, definitely a technical term. But there's a pretty good chance that you've got your head screwed on straight. You've done something big like this before, even if it isn't this specific thing. So you kind of know what you're looking at. You're not a nobody, right? You know your stuff. But executives tend to fall into a trap that leads to strategic misrepresentation on projects. So what is strategic misrepresentation? It's project managers and project teams intentionally lowballing their estimates when they're communicating to stakeholders outside the project team, like project executives or the general public, or whomever else, for the purposes of getting their project approved. Okay? So strategic misrepresentation, you might have guessed, another Bent Flyvberg term. This is from way, way back, though, like the 90s, I think, or maybe even the 80s, he coined this term. But the idea here is that, and I've seen it happen in real life in my own projects, like in miniature compared to the big dig, but I'm always the project manager. Like I had a reputation when I was working for a big oil company that you've definitely heard of, for bringing projects to their approval gates so that they could be killed, right?
Right.
Because they would hand me the projects. I would cost them accurately, right? Build risk in, make sure that the schedule was executable, do constructability, so all that stuff, right? For much, much smaller projects than this. But I would bring them to the gate. Everybody would be like, great job, you passed your gate. And then they wouldn't fund it because it was too expensive. And I always had the thought in the back, I wasn't as well read on this stuff as then as I am now, but I always had the thought in my mind, was man, should I have just gone in with the last guy's numbers? I typically was taking these projects over from other people who had gone to a previous gate and said, it's going to cost, some number. And that number would be 3 or 4 times lower than the one that I would present. So it's if I just came in with the lower number, would I be running a project right now? And that's strategic misrepresentation.
Right. And so, it makes me think of, if I'm going to go in, I'm going to lowball, and then I'm going to get it approved, and then I'm going to start. What's the moment where all of a sudden we have to have that conversation?
Yeah.
I need more money. And what does that look like from an executive sponsor's perspective, right? This is a coming to Jesus moment, or whoever.
It can be.
Right?
Come to deity of choice.
Come to deity of choice. You pick.
It could be, but it often isn't. And I think this is where the real insidious nature of strategically misrepresenting your project for approval really comes in, because you then have to, because you're effectively exploiting 2 cognitive biases when you're doing this. One is small number better than big number, right?
Yep.
When you see big number, you think, whoa, that's pretty expensive, right? Sticker shock, right, is the common term for it.
Yep.
Executives absolutely get sticker shock. So when you start talking to them about your project, which, some joker in another country told you was going to cost this much and take this long, thinking here specifically of a big oil company, they would frequently do their estimates out of Houston. And then here I am in Calgary and I have to go run this project in the oil sands. And I'm like, these numbers are a fantasy, right?
Right.
So if you just take those numbers, which are designed to get projects approved, and run with them, then you're going to run up against, change order city for sure. But all that is in service of big number scary, right?
Right.
So that's one cognitive bias. The other one is sunk cost fallacy.
Yeah.
Right. We've talked about that before on the show. So when projects are underway, and they are starting to show signs of life, right? It's clear that, you dig your big trench, you're going to put some pipe in it, and then one day there's going to be a fire hydrant at the other end. Your fire hydrant project will be ready, right? So once that starts, it's hard to stop, right?
That's right. So when you're doing a project as large as the Big Dig, at a point, you just can't stop. You have to finish it, right?
Yeah.
And that probably happened early on when some of the construction started. I mean, there's no looking back.
Well, so this is what I'm talking about with sunk cost fallacy, though. You just summed it up beautifully. That's exactly what people are thinking when they're having these difficult conversations about cost and schedule overruns. Is they're thinking, well, we can't turn back now. Yeah, you can. Absolutely, you can. I mean, there does come a point where it makes more sense to finish than it would to stop and start over.
Right. Yeah.
But that point is much, much later than most people think. Right. And we have examples, in the canon of projects, which we should probably pick this one. I can't remember the specific name of it, but there was a large super collider that I think, folded up its tent in the 90s, early 2000s. We'll do some research on that one and bring it up. But maybe that one cost. We
could do another episode on just defense
we definitely
or just
should.
Scientific. Yeah, that would be interesting.
We're going to do another one of these
go
for
ahead.
Sure.
Yep.
Yeah. But that project cost more to dismantle than it would have to finish. And the dismantling, I believe, is still ongoing, right?
Yeah.
And that all took place while another better super collider was being built, right?
Right.
So it made it really difficult to justify finishing. So there's lots of ingredients in that stew, and we'll definitely talk more about it because it's a really interesting one. But that one was definitely too far along to justify canceling it, right? But the Big Dig was delivered 9 years late.
Let's put yourself in the room as the executive sponsor looking at some of that initial planning and proposals, that you're at the first decision gate. What could you as the executive sponsor have asked, or what could you have pushed for that would have given you sort of better insight beyond that strategic misrepresentation?
Well, one of the reasons why strategic misrepresentation works for getting projects across the starting line is because executives don't have as much information as project managers and project teams do. So they're reliant on others for that information. And if that information seems to support a small number case, then they will approve it, right? So so I guess the point is, we as time traveling project managers, we know what went wrong, right? But that doesn't mean that we should expect people at the time to look at a number and know, oh, that number's too small, right? But that's not a fair expectation. So what you have to do instead is ask a bunch of general questions that would apply to any project that would either validate that the estimates are good or not, right? So one of those is, have you built risk into this, right? How much risk? What kinds of risks? So for anything that's going underground, right? And as the Big Dig name would imply, it's underground.
It's also big.
It's also big. Yeah,
that was a horrible dad joke. Okay,
yeah, well, that's fine. No, don't worry about it, buddy. You are a horrible dad.
I'm trying. Yeah,
horrible dad jokes. I'm just kidding. I'm sure you're a wonderful dad. But anyway, there were massive risks that were encountered on this project. For example, pretty much as soon as they started digging, they realized that there were a set of unmapped underground utilities there that were over 150 years old. There were no as-built drawings, no maps, nothing. The geology hadn't been adequately figured out, so they had to keep stopping the dig to deal with these kinds of issues. And that's the kind of thing that you can't see coming specifically when you're on day one of a project when you haven't broken ground yet. So that's where risk estimation comes in, and some risks may overtop the actual scope of the project. That's what happened here, right? Like paying for these risks and for the consequences, like the costs of those risks, is what made this project so expensive.
Right. But what I'm hearing from you is like, even though you don't know that those actual utilities, by asking a more general question, look, Boston is an old town.
Yeah.
There's going to be stuff buried underground, perhaps.
Yes.
So what are we going to do when we encounter that? Not if, but when. We're going to kind of just assuming the risk is real, and just assuming that because it's old, there's going to be stuff, right? So that's what I'm hearing from you, and I think it's
no, that's exactly it. I mean, you have to ask those kinds of questions. I mean, usually this gets standardized in some kind of form that you'd fill out as a project manager. It's like, go to your decision gate and bring it to your project executive. You fill out all this information, and they'll ask you about accounting for risk, right? But as an executive, it's your responsibility to have some idea of precisely how badly these kinds of projects can go, right? Because if you come to your decision gate for something as big and risky and frankly unique as the Big Dig, and you say, oh, I'm carrying about 10% of contingency or 20% of contingency. I think their number was 15%. I'm not 100% on that one. Like, they came to the initial decision gate with a budget that was comically undersized, right? We know now, as time travelers, that this project was multiple hundreds of percents over for reasons that maybe weren't foreseeable, but they could have foreseen the fact that it would go multiple hundreds of percents over, right? So the correct budget for this project was probably that 15 billion number, right?
Mm-hmm.
And like all that interest servicing is driven by the schedule. That you know, like the fact that the project stopped and started a bunch of times. There were a bunch of lawsuits. Like a woman even died, during a ceiling collapse in 2006. Like when a 3-ton concrete panel fell off the roof onto her car. I mean, that's tragedy, and like that was absolutely preventable through like enhanced structural engineering and not building the plane while you fly it. Right.
Right.
So accounting for all that. Sorry, Nate. Go ahead.
No, I was gonna. Yeah, that's a lot to account for.
It is, and no, I mean it is because and you
that's
can't
my
see
insightful moderation. Okay, go ahead.
You can't see it coming, right?
Yeah.
But you can't see that specific thing coming. But
Well,
you can see something.
Something,
Yes.
right? Yeah, and that's kind of like moving on to the next one, which is a really interesting one, but is the flood, the gates in Venice.
Yeah.
And that sort of the could you see it coming? This is a little bit different in terms of like why the delays and why it went over budget, and stuff happened that was tragic, but on a different level.
Yeah. I mean, it's tempting when you're talking about a project that's being executed in Italy to be like, well, obviously the reason why it went over was because of corruption and graft and the mafia and whatnot. And you're like, come on, that's a little bit, not racist exactly, but a little bit of a stereotype. Like, why would you do that? Like, come on, there must have been something else. No, actually, that's exactly what happened. So, now it must be said also that there's a really interesting case to be made that this project should not have been built at all.
Right.
And we can, I mean, that sounds weird. We'll get to that, but like put a pin in that extremely controversial statement. But the point is that, this project went over by about 4x, right? And even those early estimates are not really clear because there was no public bidding, no competitive public bidding on this project.
Zero. Yeah.
It was a single source to a consortium that immediately descended into bribes and padded costs and using companies that didn't really exist. And like in 2014, an investigation done by the city revealed that there was systematic corruption that made the thing cost as much as it did and take as long as it did. And the Italian government is not famous for its ability to control costs on projects. Okay.
Like just to play devil's advocate to that, I mean, like it is, when you talk about it is old, like the Italian, like Rome, like everything in Italy is so ancient, right?
Yeah.
And I think in Rome, aren't they doing? There's a subway, but I mean, it's like they dig a foot, and
Yes.
you're running into other things that have to be. So yeah,
I've actually been to that subway line
Have
in
you?
Rome, by the way. Oh,
Okay.
yeah. And I've also been to the museum that they opened specifically to contain all the artifacts that they keep finding
that
while
are
they're digging.
extracting. Yeah,
They're
and then, I
extracting,
mean
yeah.
they're dealing with like a level of complexity that I think in North America you just do not have.
Well,
right?
you don't, but like, flash back to our conversation just now on the big dig, and we're finding 150-year-old buried infrastructure, right?
Mhm.
I mean, that's not that different from. I mean, the treatment of the risk is different, but the fact that you're digging a foot and then you find a thing and you go, well, I guess I'm stopping to deal with this now. Like that's exactly what you're dealing with in something like the Rome Metro, which having been there, I've been there a few times over the course of several years, and that thing never seems to progress. I'm telling you, like it's a wild project. Like it's been in play, and it's one of those things that like in Rome and in Italy generally, so much public money is spent on preservation and cultural stuff, right? And of course it is, because it's a massive tourist draw. Like places like Venice, if you ruin Venice, you ruin the economy of northern Italy, right?
Mm-hmm.
So obviously they feel like they had to really protect it, and one of the things they were trying to protect it from is sea level rise and the impacts of climate change on the local ecosystem, and the fact that storms are getting rougher and tougher and dumping even more seawater into the lagoon than is typically there,
right?
Raising the water level. So like there was a flood in Venice a few years back that knocked out a number of historical buildings and had people sheltering on top floors of buildings. That's not that uncommon there, but it is uncommon for it to happen this severely, this much, which leads me to what I was saying before. Like they probably shouldn't have built this project. They should have built something else, right? Because they have to leave these gates closed like most of the time.
So let's imagine, let's just go back and imagine that, skip the corruption. Like how would you set this up?
Well, it's tempting to think of this and like an Italian politician compared this to the moon landing. Like the president of the consortium, I guess he wasn't a politician. He was part of the consortium that built it. But he asked the question: did the Americans launch a public bid to go to the moon? And the answer is no. but going to the moon had literally never been done before, right? Building giant floodgates absolutely has been done before. Right. I mean, and the system as it's built, it does work. Like it's been activated. Like I said, it's closed more often than it's open now.
Yeah, it's pretty wild. Like to watch it, like the videos on YouTube, it's pretty interesting to watch.
Yeah, it is. It's a really unique. I mean, I'm saying it's been done before, and then I just said it's unique. But like, big massive floodgate has been done before. This specific type of like floating structure has not been used for it, as my understanding.
Yeah.
But
now with sea levels rising, like that, apparently they have to adjust it. Like there's
So that's what I mean when I'm saying, like, as a time traveler, we know that this project wasn't the right thing to suit their needs, right? Because it doesn't allow recirculation with the sea. So they have this massive algae problem. And Venice already smells terrible. I mean, so, and now it smells even worse because in addition to smelling like, refluxed raw sewage, it also smells like algae. So,
Right. Yes.
Great.
Let's move on and talk about the last project that at least we're going to discuss on this podcast. We have a lot of experience, Dokanish, with nuclear. And so
we do.
This is right up our alley, but Votel in the U.S. Did I say that right? Votel?
I think so. Votel?
Yeah, Votel.
It's spelled Vogtely.
Vogtely.
Yeah, I think
that
it's
was
Votel.
like, when I was from the U.S., like, I probably would have pronounced it the same way. And
Vogtely.
Yeah, like Merlot or like
oh god,
Fourier or like I can
Fourier is a hard one for me, honestly. Like I can't get behind Fourier. I can't do it. It's a Fourier.
You can say Fourier.
Here's a question: what is the? Do you know that piece of furniture that looks like a couch, but like the half of the back is missing, and like maybe it has like a short back on one side and like an armrest that's kind of like swoopy shaped.
Chaise.
A chaise what?
Lounge?
It's a chaise longue.
What?
It's called a chaise longue.
Okay, let's delete that. Okay.
No,
because
absolutely
I look
not.
like a fool. Okay, let's go back to the project.
Yeah. Okay.
Like, tell me about this.
Yeah. So the Vodal 3 and 4 is what we're talking about. Like units 3 and 4 represented the first attempt to build a new nuclear reactor in the United States in over 30 years. As you are likely aware, the Carter administration effectively killed nuclear in the crib for reasons good and bad. Okay.
Yeah.
Like this is one of those like throwing the baby out with the bathwater moments in American history where we could have started down the road of a more responsible, more affordable version of clean energy, than we currently get from the nuclear industry in the U.S. and Canada, because we just threw 30 years of reactor building experience right in the garbage, and that's unfortunate. But there's a nuclear renaissance now, right? Like we're trying to get more reactors built more quickly all over the world, but in particular in North America. And this is one of the standard bearers for that nuclear renaissance, right?
So what did we learn? Oh, sorry.
No, please.
Yeah. What did we learn from that when you were doing some of your research?
Well, as you might have guessed from the fact that we're including it in this episode, it didn't go great. It was, 2.5x.
How bad was it? 2.5x.
Yeah,
it was bad.
So it's pretty bad. Delivered about 7 years late. Both reactors 3 and 4 were delivered 7 years late. There was also a sister project that got canceled along the way because it wasn't deemed affordable, but that project had already spent $9 billion.
Wow.
So in addition to the overage on Vodal 3 and 4, the VC Summer project, adds $9 billion to that price tag. You have, taxpayers carrying almost an additional $30 billion versus what they thought they were. It's taxpayers and ratepayers, right? Because eventually all these things are owned by like consortia whose job is to sell electricity. And the way that they recover the costs for building the thing is with their rates, right? So nuclear is still a high rate way to generate electricity. It's expensive.
Yeah, it is. And some of the causes of the delays were like there was a design that existed on paper only. There were coolant pumps that they had to be fixed. It took time. There was a bankruptcy involved.
Yeah.
I don't know. Unpack some of those and like how would you have planned? Look, as a time traveler, how would you have planned running the PMO for some of these what seem like obvious delays now that we're time travelers?
Yeah. As time travelers, they do seem obvious, but again, at the time, it should not have been impossible to predict that maybe not these specific things, but something would drag your schedule down, right? Mm-hmm. Now, there's an old saw: an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure, right?
Right.
That is true in project space. It absolutely is. So when you have a risk first footing for a project like this, I mean, the core thing to talk about on this project is first of a kind, right? Mm-hmm, it's building a unique, novel design that no one has ever built before. Like this particular generation of reactor is like 2 or 3 generations more recent than the last one that was built in the US. So anybody, even if you did have people on the project team who had built like a Westinghouse reactor back in the 60s, right? Even if you did have those people, there's very, very few similarities other than the fact that they both involve nuclear fission between, a reactor design like that and one like what they were actually trying to build, which was the Westinghouse AP1000.
Yeah,
right?
That's actually, you bring up a good point, which is that some of these projects are literally like the career of an individual.
Yeah.
And if they span longer, than the career, like how do you manage that kind of risk when the timeline is so long that you've got new people that are coming on, you're replacing, people on the team, et cetera? Like how do you approach that? What are your thoughts or frameworks around that?
Well, the first thing to think about here is that, we're talking about like ratepayers and actually having to buy electricity, and that's how you make your money back on a project like this one. I think it's important to note here that anytime your job when you're making a project is to sell something at the end of it, you should spend basically however much it costs to accelerate your schedule. In the case of something like this project clocked in 7 years late, and I'd be willing to bet that a very, very large percentage of the extra cost that came along with that was driven by that schedule. I mean, for example, there were over 180 design changes that required regulatory approval submitted during the course of this project. Okay. Now, you know what you don't have to do? Change a design if you've already gotten all of those elements approved, right? Like, I'm not enough of an expert. I'm not an expert at all in the design of nuclear reactors.
That's
okay,
right.
so I couldn't tell you what all 180 design changes were and how many of them were valid. Okay, but I can tell you that this is the sign of a project that just didn't spend enough time doing its own homework.
Right.
Right. So, plus like the contractor involved in building it, like I mentioned, it was a Westinghouse design. Westinghouse went bankrupt over the course of the project execution. The risk of that happening is present on every large project. Like that's one of the things I screen for when I'm screening risk registers for quality is I look like, do you have a contractor insolvency risk here? Right. Because it's a real problem and it affects projects pretty dramatically like it did this one. Because this was initially priced out as a fixed price model, which literally drove the contractor bankrupt and forced the government to switch to what's called a cost plus model, right? So cost plus is basically, I, the contractor, spend $1, my markup is 10%, so you pay me $1.10.
Right.
Right. So
Right.
It puts all of the risk onto the owner operator organization and removes all the risk from the contractor, which was the purpose of making that change.
Yeah.
But then, as somebody who is, I don't have to buy my power from this particular reactor, but if I did, I'd be pretty sore about the fact that I bailed out giant electric company out of my own pocket, and I'm going to continue doing that for the rest of time.
So what about the fixes, and we talk about there's coolant pumps that had to be recalled. Yeah, like what? Walk me through what was it, and then maybe is there a way that you can having looked at the data, say, like, how would you approach sort of planning for that and making sure that you allocated?
I'm going to make two bets here.
Okay.
I'm going to bet, two things. One, I'm going to bet that some risk like this existed in their risk register, or at the very least in the minds of the estimators and project managers at the time, right?
I will not take that bet.
You shouldn't, because I can basically guarantee that I'm right about this.
I will not take that bet.
Major components of your project, like major technical components, failing and needing to go back to the shop for whatever reason and then come back, that is a risk. Again, that's another one that I screen for when I'm screening large project risk registers for quality. It's like, do you have like a procurement failure of some kind on your risk register? Is it attached to one of your major technical components? Like, are you, because like if you don't do that, you're making unsafe assumptions about how solid your scope is, and this is a first of a kind. You're kind of making it up as you go, so you really do need to hang some pretty beefy risks. So this brings me to bet number 2. I bet that even though they saw this risk coming, they dramatically underestimated how much it could possibly cost them in terms of time and money.
Right.
Because
and that's probably almost impossible to predict.
It may be, again, we're time travelers, so of course we've got great insight into this, right? Like, we know that they needed 2 years to get this fix in, right? And that basically ground the project to a halt because they were already 4 years into construction. So, and when you have to stop a project for something that dramatic, stopping a project is really, really difficult.
Yeah.
Right? Restarting it is even more so.
And I think, to use your example from a couple projects back in this episode, like, as an executive sponsor, it's my job to sort of ask more general questions about the risk. So what happens if, our supply chain breaks down? What happens if these, the pieces don't all fit together? I'm not going to ask you about a cooler. I'm just going to ask you, like, do the Legos fit? Like, and what happens if they don't?
Well, that is
do?
perfect. I wish project executives ask questions like that, Nick, because that's the perfect question to ask. Like,
on my way up, that's right.
Yeah,
I'm going to go from marketing to project exec.
Pretty soon, I'm going to be going hat in hand to Nate and being like, Mr. Nate, may I please have some money for my project?
And I'm rubber stamping everybody's face. I don't know what that means.
I don't either, but I'm sure it's paid
approved across the forehead. Approved.
Or worse.
Or
rejected.
denied.
So,
Rejected.
the rejected
so what would
stamp
they say?
is backwards, so you can see it in the mirror every morning.
That's right. So you're gonna praise me in my elucidation.
Yeah, indeed, because it's exactly the kind of question that I'm talking about. Like, it's generic but not generic enough. Like the truly generic version of that would be, it's generic but it's not too generic, because if you take it one level of abstraction higher, then you're asking a question like, well, could it run over? And the answer is yes, right? But the way you phrased it is good for like driving technical conversation. So you ask a question like that, it's like, throwing something into the ring, right, while there's a fight going on and just watching the chaos happen. Like, you don't have to participate in the fight. You can just watch, right?
Yep.
But
yep.
that's what your job is, to create chaos in your project team as a project executive. Like, you're supposed to challenge them. You're supposed to make them think hard questions that they haven't thought of before. So if you ask them, like, what happens if all this stuff doesn't fit together? I mean, if they hadn't included that risk in the risk register of like, well, there's going to be integration failures or a major component has to be returned and replaced. Like, by the way, the pump that came back to them, I don't know this for sure, but I'd be willing to bet that there were at least some technical differences that had knock-on effects to other parts of the design, right?
No doubt, yeah.
So by the time they actually got it back and started integrating, the reason why it took 2 years isn't because it's hard to hook a pump up. It's because there was a lot of other stuff to do, right? And you don't get to a 7-year delay on your schedule without having missed some of those, right?
Right.
So asking that question early, letting the knife fight get started, you don't approve a project until the knife fight is over and you have a winner in the ring, right?
So what do you've done quantitative or risk assessments before? You've optimized a contingency that you're talking about, right?
Yeah.
Like, what do you think their risk register looked like in 2016?
Too short, two numbers too small. I mean, that's
that's the kind of generalization that we're talking about.
Exactly.
Right?
I mean, like, if you're embarking on, okay, so a good rule of thumb, if you are embarking on a project of massive complexity, your risk register should have hundreds of things in it. Okay. Over 100 is a good benchmark. So like, if somebody hands me a risk register for a mega project, and they're like, we want to spend, $26 billion building a new reactor, and here's our 5 risks. I'm going to be like, go home, come back when you're serious about this. You have not done your homework. You have not thought through the risks. Do some research and come back when you're ready, right? Like, I have a personal rule to save myself time. When I'm reviewing something and it is so obviously broken that it just needs to be started from the ground up, I don't finish the review. I hand it back to the people and I say, you need to do a better job. I shouldn't have to tell you in the ways in which you are failing right now, because I'm 1 page into your 10-page document. I already know that you did not hit the mark, right?
Yeah.
So I'll give some high-level notes, ask the kinds of questions you asked, let people go back and come back. And it's amazing how risk registers go from 10 risks to 100 risks when you make challenges like that one.
Yeah.
Right?
But here's so my theory, right? Like, I'm listening to you talk, and I think that all of these projects that we've talked about, right? Someone confused, the approvability of the project with the deliverability of the project, right? That's the strategic misrepresentation, right? And they confuse those two. They built these risk registers or schedules that just, in hindsight were unachievable or so what is the anecdote to that?
Well, I would say before I get into the anecdote, anecdote is story. Antidote.
Antidote.
We're telling an anecdote about antidotes.
What's the anecdote, Albert?
Well, before I go there,
what's the antidote?
Yeah, well, thank you for restarting this for the third time. But before I go there, I want to draw a distinction here between strategic misrepresentation, right, which was definitely going on in the Big Dig, to something else. Like, it's kind of I wouldn't even call it its evil twin, because I think strategic misrepresentation,
you can call
is
it
the
evil twin. Yeah.
No, but that's the evil twin.
This
the
is more
non-evil
benign.
twin. The more benign twin is optimism bias.
Interesting.
Right?
Yes.
And we've talked about optimism bias a lot on this show before, but just to quickly recap, optimism bias is the feeling that, your team, you as a manager, you as an estimator, whatever, you're just going to do better than the last guys, right? That's what it means. So it is your belief that you can do better. And that's a great thing to have, like that strong belief in your team's ability to achieve success is great, but it shouldn't translate to your numbers. Okay. Because you should manage your team in an from an optimistic perspective, like from an optimistic footing, like manage them like they are rock stars. But rock stars need a lot of maintenance, and
they do.
That doesn't mean that you're going to, the average project performs averagely, and the average project goes way, way over. So why would you think that you're going to be better than that? You won't be, right?
Right.
Like the more unique your project is, the more time has passed since the last time it was done, the fewer members of your team have built one of these things before, the higher those chances are that your optimistic estimate is going to be not just wrong, but dead wrong to the tune of hundreds of %, right?
And that is the cure, folks.
That's the cure. Yeah. You have to dial that optimism bias back, right?
Yeah.
And you have to control for it. Like the UK has published estimating manuals that are pretty darn good. And the Green Book is kind of like the colloquial name for the estimating guidelines there. So they released a supplement specifically to combat optimism bias that has a lot of really interesting data in it. But it basically boils down to like you're adding 100% to most project estimates early on. Like if Vodal comes back to me and says, hey, $14 billion, we're going to get this thing done. I don't have to think for a moment before I say like, nope, it's 28 billion. Go back, sharpen your pencils, figure out why it's 28 billion. When I'm convinced that you've got your arms around this, then we'll talk. Right.
Yep.
So the first blush estimate, especially if you can look at contingency numbers and see them as a percent, like they're 10 or lower for a project like this one, you just don't approve it. You just don't. You can't. Right.
No.
And like, it's also really tempting to focus this conversation as we have on cost. But as I mentioned before, like the most common driver for cost increase is schedule extension.
Surprise.
So you've really got to think hard about your schedule too, and the schedule risks, right? Like the timeline, if it's going to stay, fixed in stone, your cost is going to be astronomical. You need some schedule contingency in there to absorb the very predictable delays that are going to happen on a first of a kind project.
Yeah. All right, Albert, let's wrap up. What's your one piece of advice for that executive sponsor who's looking at sort of that first estimate, that first blush schedule?
My piece of advice for them is one I've given on this show before, and that is do not be afraid of the big number, okay? Like your choice as an executive isn't small number versus big number. It's big number now versus bigger number later. Those are your two actual choices, right? All the projects we discussed, like the Opera House, the Big Dig, the Venice Flood Barrier, Vodals 3 and 4, they all have something in common, which is that they are unique in their time, right? So if you are an executive and you are looking at a unicorn, do not confuse it for a horse, okay?
That's the advice, folks.
That's the advice. Like, when you're looking at a unicorn, it's not a horse, right?
We also, you mentioned some interesting, just to add to that too. Yeah. Your pointed advice about asking the general, but not like super general questions to start to have some of that, technical conversations to spark that conversation is a really good takeaway for our listeners. Right.
I mean, to me, if you're a project executive, it's almost your responsibility to say no, right? It's the first thing that you get from your project team. I mean, the data tells us that project teams are really, really awful at generating a first pass estimate early in the project, right? Every single bit of published data from the UK Green Book supplement about optimism bias that I mentioned earlier, to the AACE cost estimating guidelines, to every single bank of published historical data you can imagine, including, again, Ben Flyberg's, that's an appendix to how big things get done. He's got a cost appendix there that says by industry, here's how much things go over. Guess what? There's very few of them that are in single digits.
Yeah.
Okay. So when you are talking about a first blush estimate, as an executive, you probably don't even have to open the envelope and see the number before you just say like, nope, it's too low. And they'll be like, well, but you haven't even seen our number yet. It's like, but I know it's too low.
Exactly.
So, I guess that's my second piece of advice for executives is say no more.
Yeah.
Right. Like,
it's good advice.
Start the knife fight. Don't be afraid to say no. Like, just force your teams to spend more time figuring things out, right? Number does not go down. Number goes up, guys. Right?
Yeah.
So
yeah, that's true. Well, that was a good conversation, man. I love the insights on the past projects, and yeah, it's easy to be a time traveler and sort of look back, but then it's, let's talk about how it could have gone better. But yeah, that was super interesting. And like,
plus, everything old is new again.
Yeah,
right?
It's true.
Like,
right.
There's gonna be more big, splashy construction projects. There's gonna be more big tunnels to replace elevated highways. There's gonna be more flood barriers, and there's definitely gonna be more nuclear. So there are lessons to be taken away from our time travel experience here.
Before we go, I want to rehash that survey a little bit.
Yes,
and
please.
Talk about our goal is to get to know you, our listeners, right? I don't know if I told you this, but we have passed a milestone. Apparently, we have 500 downloads now.
Okay, all right. Look at us.
And we have lasted for over a year, which less than 15% of podcasts I read last that long. So, kudos to us, right?
Yeah, absolutely. That's a milestone. And we want to celebrate that milestone by offloading all of our planning work to you.
Yeah. What I really want to talk about is we want you to participate in a survey. We want to get to know you. We're going to run a survey, short, sweet. It's going to find out who you are, what you do, where you do it, who you do it for. We'd love some feedback on our discussion, maybe some ideas and topics for the future to address. As Albert said, we want to offload the planning for future episodes to you, our listeners.
Yeah. Yep. And as part of that, we are going to ask you to, come up with a question or two for us, right?
That's right.
We are going to start including a Q&A component to each of these episodes, or when we have a critical mass of questions, we'll throw one in there. But we want to understand what kinds of questions you'd like us to address. Like,
That's
our
right.
style now, like we've got a year. I'm sure everybody who's listening this far into the podcast is probably a fan of podcasts in general, and probably this one too.
Yeah, and
so
my neighbor
Dave.
Dave. Dave.
Hey
Let's
Dave,
not
what's
forget
going on,
Hey
man?
Dave. Yeah.
And also another shout out to my dad. Hey Dad.
Yeah.
But we want to hear from the Daves and Dads of the world. Like, what kinds of questions would you like us to answer?
Right. And the project managers, the other PMO directors, like give Albert the hard one. I'm just here to moderate. I'm the funny guy.
Throw some softballs to Nate.
Yeah.
And then what do you do for fun, Nate? And then Albert, like, why are you so confident that you could do Vodal 3 better?
Yes, exactly. I'll take the easy ones. So we're gonna post a link to the survey in the show notes. Please, participate. Give us your honest feedback. We're gonna also have like a subscribe so we can start to maybe initiate more conversations, with our listeners off the podcast. I don't know what I'm trying to say, Albert, but yeah, we just want to communicate with you more and more often. So,
in the places where we find you, so places like we're about to start doing a little bit more with Reddit, right?
That's right.
So we're going to be spending more time kind of engaging with our community where we find them. So LinkedIn, Reddit are the two big ones. We may go with other places now, but as always, you can find updates about the show on LinkedIn and on riskyplanner.com.
That's right.
So, look there for the survey. We'll be annoying you with links before you know it. So
that's right. All right. Thanks for listening, everybody. Thanks, Albert.
Yeah, thank you, Nate, and thanks to everybody in advance for filling out that survey and asking us some amazing questions.
Right.
Some easy ones for Nate and some hard ones for me.
Definitely. All right. Till next time.
See you next time.
Bye.
Hey everybody, it's Albert here. Thanks for tuning in to the Risky Planner podcast. We hope today's conversation was informative and above all else inspires you to excellence in what you do. If you liked today's episode, don't forget to rate, subscribe, and leave a review. It helps us reach more listeners just like you. I'd also like to thank Thompson Igbo for letting us use his excellent music on our show. If you like what you hear, check him out at igbomusic.com. That's EGBO music.com. Talk at you later.